All right, it's wonderful to see everyone in the audience. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sophie Johannin. I'm a clinical scientist at a medical device company called Galvanized Therapeutics. I'm also a clinical research instructor for a company called Clinical Research Fast Track. I teach about once a month. I'm also a STEM mentor for JSHS, which is the Junior Science and Humanities Symposium for gifted high school students interested in STEM careers. So I am all about this from every angle, and I'm also a avid enthusiast of bioethics, and that's what really the core of most of our topics with clinical trials, one burning question. So as you heard, we have moved from Clubhouse to LinkedIn audio because that's where most of our audience was coming from. So we wanted to go where our audience is and provide continuing learning and education and discussion for everyone who's interested and involved. And that's what's been happening. So it took us a couple months to really do this, get this transition underway, but now we are here. So at this time, please take this time to use the invite button at the bottom of your screen to and colleagues to this event. If you're inviting that you think may be interested in the conversation, you can narrow the search by using words like clinical trials or research. And if you have to leave early or miss part of the discussion, don't worry, because we will be archiving this discussion thanks to Thea Romero, you see on your screen. She is our tech extraordinaire, and she will have this discussion archived for all of you, and we will post a link to it in our summary post later on tomorrow. Feel free to follow me and all of our moderators and panelists here today, and be sure to check out and follow others in the room where inspired. We do encourage audience participation, so if you find yourself inspired, please feel free to raise your digital hand, and we'll do our very best to get everyone up to speak. There is a limit of 17 speaking simultaneously, so we will try to give everyone a chance, and then after each person has spoken, we will probably have to move you back to the audience section so that someone else can speak. So please don't be offended or alarmed if you see your profile moving back and forth. That's just to allow everyone a chance to speak. You'll also see a button at the bottom of your screen, a react it's called, and you can use that to respond if you want to join the discussion, but you are not prepared to speak, or you're not in an area where you have clear audio and you can speak. Also, look around you at your fellow audience members. You might find someone who you share beliefs with, or professional networking, or someone who has attributes that you aspire to, and you can follow that person, connect with that person. That's what we're doing here. So I'd like to pass the mic to Michael Young, our co-moderator, who is going to tee up our sponsor and our topic. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Sophie. I appreciate that. Welcome to everybody here. My name is Michael Young. I'm a life sciences C-suite consultant working at the intersection of clinical strategy and commercialization. This concept for the one burning question came up through some of the work that we've been doing, and today I am here as a support in our sponsorship from Consuli.net. I work there as a fractional CMO. For those of you who don't know Consuli, broadly, it's a public benefit company with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. And, through our research, the experts have suggested that our individual health data is worth about $20,000 per year. So we're seeking, opportunities to provide some equitable compensation to patients who participate and share their data. Consuli helps people choose who get access to and how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, to get them paid for their data and can make medicine better. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members where Consuli becomes their agent. Members receive smart-matched individual offers from Consuli for opportunities which include participation in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join the Consuli movement, and so if any of you are interested in learning more about it, you can certainly check it out at consuli.net. That's consuli.net. So I want to welcome all of you to our Clinical Trials LinkedIn audio today. We're premiering today for the first time, and very openly I'll share with you that while we put together an excellent program, we know there may be some glitches along the way, so we appreciate your leniency in allowing us to make those mistakes. I and my co-moderators have designed Clinical Trials OBQ, or One Burning Question, for clinical trialists, pharma industry professionals, and patients and patient advocates interested in solving burning questions in clinical trials. We will hold these sessions monthly starting today, and the next one is scheduled for April 21st. There may be some modification on that as things go along, so watch your LinkedIn notifications. It's important to know that you can click on anyone's face to find their LinkedIn profile, so you can do that certainly with our co-moderators here, but other people, as they're brought up to the stage, will have that feature as well. So let's meet our co-moderators, and I want to start with Tea Romero. Tea, can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. Hello, my name is Tea Romero. I have been in clinical research for 19 years now. I currently work in the client success role, working directly with pharmaceuticals and with CROs on life science solutions for their clinical trials. This month, we have the One Burning Question on fraud, and we will be opening up this discussion soon. Before we do that, I want to say hello to our other esteemed panelists this morning. And as I will be keeping track of the speaker sequence, it may look different on screen for each of us. So I will pass it from left to right and top to bottom how I see it on my end. So let us then begin with Christine. Christine, if you could please start us off.
Sure. Well, I'm Christine. I'm going to keep it short because I know you can all click on my profile and see what I do. But I would like to mention we're talking about data here and really around the fraud and the spotlight on research here. And so I am a member of the CAPS program, the Community for Access, Privacy, and Security with the All of Us Research, and a member of the Light Collective. It's an organization that looks for, or is looking out for, digital rights on patients. So I love the topic, and I can't wait to get started. And I'm not sure who we're going to next.
Oh, that's okay. I'll pass it to Jennifer. Thanks, Christine.
Hi, everyone. I will also keep it short since we have a lot to talk about. I appreciate Christine clarifying that we're talking about data because, as we all know, fraud is such an enormous topic. And I had mentioned on LinkedIn that it touches really all of us in many different aspects. And we see it in the news all the time. So thank you for that. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Jennifer Von Frisco. I've been in clinical research for over 30 years. I primarily come from the sponsor side. I actually completely come from the sponsor side. I've worked with both large pharma and really in the last 15 years I've focused on smaller, innovative biotech. I find it really rewarding and fun. And I also think the reality is what we do for small and large pharma isn't all that different. We're all trying to find innovative ways to get research going, certainly within GCP and, within the rules. So I'm excited to be part of this group. I'll pass it on. I think Scott might be next.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for all of our attendees out there. I see some familiar faces. So thanks for taking time from your Friday work schedule to listen in. We promise you one burning question and look forward to kind of doing this on a regular monthly basis now. So quick intro for me, for those of you I have not had the chance to interact with yet. My name is Scott Schliebner. I'm a clinical development executive, a clinical trialist. I focus on patient-focused approaches to reduce the burden of clinical trials and make clinical trials accessible to all patients, wherever they are and whatever they may look like. I also serve as a board member for a couple nonprofit rare disease and rare disease caregiver organizations, do a little bit of strategic advising for some healthcare or health tech startups as well, and just really love being part of our industry and part of this one burning question crew. So thanks again for taking time from your day to join us. And with that, let's see, I think we have Edie with us that I could pass this over to.
So Edie is not with us today, but she will join us for our next session. But thank you, Scott, so much for the introduction and for teeing us up. I think, for those of you who are listening, as you can see, as you can tell by our introductions, we have a star-studded panel of really passionate clinical trial professionals here. I'm really proud to be part of this group. And we choose, really important topics every month to discuss and questions from you in the audience. So what is our topic for today? Today's one burning question is fraud in clinical trials. What solutions can prevent impact on patient trust? So we ended 2022 with a rousing discussion on Clubhouse about past and recent discussions about clinical research fraud. So we talked about, Edie took us all the way back to Tuskegee and, all of the historical issues that happened with clinical trials misconduct, false data, falsification of data and medical records, those kinds of things that have happened in the recent past as well, even as recent as 2022. And so we're going to continue that discussion today, focusing on patient impact and specifically solution-based, forward-thinking discussion points. So that's what I really want to focus on today. And one thing I wanted to throw out there, and I want you all to think about this, is assessing risk with a clinical trial. What is the risk of misconduct? What is the risk of fraud? And those are two different things, right? I may call on Jennifer to kind of outline the difference between the two. But it's very important to think about this ahead of time, right? While we're in the design phase of designing a study, before we've enrolled the first patient or even gotten close, what are the risks of fraud or misconduct, and how can we mitigate those risks? How can we get everyone on board, from the scientists to the CRA to the patients, the physicians, the clinical trial professionals who are working on this trial, to get everyone on the same page to focus on preventing these kinds of issues. So that's what I really want to talk about. Please raise your hand if you'd like to be called on by the speakers on stage. When we get to that section, we're going to go through our panelists first and get everyone's opinions and some guidance. Once on stage, a slow tap of your mic. You can see your mic at the bottom screen with the word mute underneath it, so you can mute or unmute. So if you tap slowly on that icon, it will indicate to us once you're on stage that you have something to say. You can use your emojis to indicate agreement or applause, and feel free to use the invite feature to share with other participants. So with that, I am going to pass the mic to Jennifer to allow her to provide some of her insights, and then we will move from left to right and top down. Jennifer, please go ahead.
Okay. All right. I was actually just messaging and was thinking, I do wish we had Edie on this, because the the exact definition with fraud versus misconduct, it's very clear, but it's also what I find. I think I was talking to our team before, and sometimes I think it's frustrating because not everything is fraud, and sometimes, especially people newer to our industry, will throw everything under fraud, and it's a very serious allegation. When we think about what happened recently in the news, and I'm not as prepared to speak about it, and I'm sure someone else here might be, the story with Pfizer and all the data that they had to, discard of after some kind of decentralized program that was going on. I mean, that's the risk. That's an enormous financial risk, and it's also, it hurts in all elements. We lose data. Patients are sometimes, taken off of the study, patients that need the study. So that is an enormous danger. And that's real fraud. And that's when we see, really, I would think that, QA department can speak to that. What's real fraud versus, look, they didn't bring the patient in on the day they were supposed to, or they signed the wrong consent, or, there's real intentional fraud versus the little things that happen every day. And I think that that's very, very important for people to be clear on. And if I think about the early days of pharma, they taught on that. They very clearly said, this is non-compliance, this is fraud, and it's important that the team is clear on what is what, and that we escalate appropriately to your QA department or your QA consultant, so that we term things properly and not make mountains out of every molehill, but make mountains out of the things that are important, and that's usually pertaining to patient safety and intentional misconduct. I think
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at, Jennifer, that intentional fraud. We have talked about last time cases where physicians and or staff or even patients have intentionally entered the wrong data, misinformation within clinical trials case reporting. That's what we mean by real fraud. Misconduct can lead to that. When we have neglect in a clinical trial and we don't have proper oversight and there's misinformation and there's the wrong data being captured. But fraud, as we consider it, more intentional. So that's what we don't want to get to. And we talked about 3 incidents that happened in 2022 at different research sites. So we're going to look at what are some solutions. What can we do not only to prevent this, but also to catch it early and then turn it around? What do we do with cases like that? On my screen, I see Michael next. So I'm going to pass the mic to Michael, and then he can pass it from there.
Thanks, Sophie. I think that one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that fraud was a discussion point here is there's just been so many examples recently wherein whether it's intentional or the type of neglect that's involved here, I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up is the fact that we have an opportunity to assure in the patient recruitment side of things that proper safeguards are put in terms of enrollment. There's so much pressure to get patients enrolled that often I think many sites inadvertently become a bit lax in terms of looking at the way in which individuals are recruited. But I think it's worth a discussion around how patients are actually vetted once they seek to enroll. There are cases, plenty of cases recently, especially where individuals who are actually conducting trials have enrolled themselves into trials. And clearly, the kinds of screening guidelines should be able to sort that out. But there are unintentional as well as intentional efforts to skew data in this regard. So I think that I'd like to make sure that the others on the panel here have a chance to share their initial thoughts, and then we've already got some people who are coming up to the stage here who I'm sure will have opportunities to share their thoughts as well. So I'll come back to Christine on this and see, Christine, if you want to add some teasers here, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'm ready to go. So I wanted to hit on a few things. I don't have any solutions right now, but I wanted to first touch on a few things. When we talk about data fraud, one of the things I just spoke about this recently is that as a patient, I'm being told in a lot of places that I can't handle my own data, right? That I'm not equipped, that I'm not prepared. But to see industry then taking that same data that I'm told I can't handle and misusing it themselves is an extreme concern to me. I have a friend, Matt, who texted me. He's in the room, and he said, did we just skip patient involvement pre-trial with regards to mistrust? So I think there's a lot of different topics here that we need to discuss if we're looking at the fraud. And as where you mentioned, as we're going into these other trials and making sure that patients are equipped or ready or whatever it is. Sorry, I'm a little spaced out today. But really, able to participate in that trial, I think there's a lot of other issues we have to look at as well. If we're going to decentralize trials and we have patients out there like myself with misdiagnoses, Michael, you and I had this conversation before where right now I can potentially participate in any type of study that's not drug related in multiple different conditions that I deal with. And so some of these issues when we're looking at, involving patients in that and how do we really do this, I think there's an underlying issue of trust that we need to talk about. We also need to really look at the incentives and how we have aligned these things, because I think that also those incentives are a big part of the fraud. And so I'm going to leave it there because I think we have a million things to talk about and we haven't gotten to the rest of our panelists. So Jennifer, I don't know if you want to go. Oh, Jennifer already went. Sorry, Scott, you want to take it from here?
Sure, I'd love to. I can hear all the pings in the background, Christine. I think we're getting messages and things that we can start to address, and I think we'll start inviting some of our attendees up to share their thoughts as well. So thanks for your patience here. Yeah, I think the environment we're in clinical development is kind of the following, right? We have more and more trials opening every year, requiring more and more patients to enroll in those clinical trials. At the same time, the studies, the protocols that we're putting out there, the schedule of assessments are becoming more and more complex. We're looking for more data points. There's more interventions. There's more assessments. We're sometimes, as I like to say, developing these protocols in a conference room in New Jersey without really pressure testing them on what's realistic for our sites. And then ultimately, of course, what's realistic for patients and families that need to actually make that kind of commitment. So with the increasing numbers needed and the increasing really participation burden, there's pressure. There's pressure that then rolls down, I think, to the clinical site level, right? So, the far majority of studies are now behind schedule with enrollment, and we're seeing increasing numbers of dropout and retention numbers. So all this rolls together to not paint a very pretty picture, right? That means we're behind schedule more and more. There's pressure to find patients. There's pressure to keep patients on. I can imagine it's been about 25 years since I was a clinical research coordinator, but if I'm at a clinical site today being pressured by a CRO or a DCT provider or a sponsor or my PI to find patients and make sure my patients stay on study, you could envision not that there's a lot of bad actors out there, but the pressures to perform and the pressures to quote unquote produce patients can lead some people astray, I think, and we've seen a couple recent examples. I also am a little concerned about two other pieces here. One, we know that very few patients are even approached for clinical trials, or that patients in general don't feel, there's a lack of mistrust that's out there, and there's a lot of work to be done to help patients feel more comfortable with the clinical trial process and participating in a clinical study. In a lot of disease states, I'm sure as our audience is aware, the standard of care is really subpar, and a patient's best option may be in a clinical trial for a new therapeutic. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are guinea pigs and being tested upon, but clinical research can be a legitimate progressive, care option, PRACO as they say. So the landscape, I think, of the increasing pressures, the numbers that are needed, and then we also, in 2023, we also have a little bit of a mixed paradigm in terms of how we're running a lot of our clinical studies as we move to incorporate patient-focused approaches like decentralized clinical trials, remote visits, home health care nurses, and telehealth. We're also introducing a few more variables in the mix that creates a little bit of a diffusion of responsibility and oversight, and I don't think that helps things either. So, and I am a giant champion of make trials easier for patients. So I really like that we're thinking about bringing studies to patients and leveraging technology that we've been slow to adopt. But it does raise the question of how do we make sure we have right oversight when we have more cooks in the kitchen in terms of participation, technology, touch points with patients. So there's some concerns there. Even if our industry is largely composed of quote unquote good actors, we've got some pressures that I think are concerning, and I think we need to think a little bit more about how do we handle this and what are some of the solutions, and maybe what's a little more consistent oversight that we can incorporate. So I'll pause there and go right ahead.
You brought up some really great points that I think will stimulate some further conversation and hopefully some solutions. As you can see, I have started to bring our audience members who raised their hands up to the stage. And just before I introduce them to start speaking, I would like to give Taya a chance to interject, provide her opinions, and then we'll move on. Thanks, Taya.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. I'd like to remind the audience as well to please invite anyone you think would benefit from this conversation. I agree with Scott that there are opportunities here to look at patient recruitment and really having a third-party oversight there. There's so many layers within clinical research, checks and balances, but having sites directly responsible for recruitment can be muddled, right? Because the site gets paid per patient, so why wouldn't they want to bring in the most patients possible? And at times that can lead to maybe fudging some of the data to bring in, a more money for the site, or ignoring data that they know would exclude patients so that they can keep them in the trial. So it's definitely an issue having the sites be in control of their own paychecks in a way. And, something else I think that falls under this discussion is just reporting out results. We're seeing that when you go onto clinicaltrials.gov, so many trials have ended, but there's not a lot of clinical trial data uploaded into that system. And we're seeing thousands of trials that are not compliant with the FDA regulation to upload, their findings. The reason this is an issue is because we're just running in the same loop, right? We're doing maybe the same exact trial, the same exact way over and over again, because we're not considering results on other trials. It's really important as an industry that we start reviewing other trials, start taking in those results as we move forward. I think it's the only way towards innovation. So when we're not following these guidelines and we're not sharing the data amongst ourselves and everyone wants to hold their results internally, it hurts us as an industry, and we really need to consider that. I'll pass it back to you, Sophie.
Thanks, Taya. A lot more to consider. Thank you so much. So now we've entered the second half of our audio event, and I want to allow our audience members to add their 2 cents. So with that, I see Matt Teresco first on my screen. And please, Matt, introduce yourself briefly and provide your 2 cents. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Sophie. My name is Matt Teresco. I am the editor-in-chief of a syndicated research product known as The Advocate, supporting the patient voice. And each year we interact with hundreds of patient advocacy organizations to understand these issues. And I think Taya and Scott bring up some really good points about the financial side of clinical trials. But at the same time, if we just look at the macro environment of the sites themselves, you have a lot of turnover, of course, that we have to deal with. But also, Scott, you had referenced how we jump from, let's say, a normal clinical trial site to a completely decentralized home trial site, which is, of course, great for patients. But I think we miss a step there as we think about how do we get pharmaceutical regulatory teams to understand that there are other hospitals that are willing to become clinical trial sites that can serve a more diverse patient population at a, with that strict oversight that's necessary, rather than automatically default to a Walgreens or CVS trial site or a home site, which again brings its own bucket of issues. So I'll leave that there, but would just love to get your points from those here in the group about how we get the regulatory teams to open up and be considered of new sites for these trials.
I love that. I'm going to table your question. Remember that, Scott, Taya, Christine, Michael, Jennifer, how do we get regulatory engaged? And then I'll pass the mic to Sandra, who's been waiting so patiently. Sandra, please briefly introduce yourself and let us know your thoughts. Sandra, are you able to unmic and join us?
Okay, good morning, everyone, or good day, everyone. My name is Sandra L. Washington. I am the founder of the Chums MediHealth Foundation. What we do is we work with the underserved and the marginalized community on a question in reference to today's topic, Spotlight on Research Fraud. I'm hearing having the patients involved, and I'm hearing patient engagement and patient empowerment when it comes down to these clinical trials. But what I am not hearing is patient education. And before you can get a patient on board to be sustainably on board with this, you have to educate them, and you cannot educate them in technical terms. You have to figure out a way to educate our communities in reference to language they understand. That's the only way that you're going to actually get a patient involved and keep them involved, is if you educate them first. So if someone has, wants to say anything or put some feedback on that, I would certainly appreciate it, knowing whether you actually have thought about how can we engage these patients on a level that they understand.
What a poignant point, Sandra. We're going to keep that. So now we have regulatory as well as patient education. We'll table those 2 points to respond after we hear from Dr. Jibran Khan. Dr. Khan, please briefly introduce yourself and let us know what you would like to bring to the table. Dr. Khan, are you able to unmic and join us?
While we're waiting for him to speak, can I say that one of the issues we really have to talk about is, again, and we'll go back to it, the agency over the data. And unless, again, for my thoughts, unless the patient has agency over their data, I think, we can't make it work in the right way.
Perfect. So regulatory oversight, patient education, and patient agency. Perfect. So Dr. Jibran Khan, if you're unable to join us right now, we'll move to Hossein Ali. Hossein, if you can unmic and briefly introduce yourself and then provide your insight, that would be great at this point. And perhaps we have some members who are a little bit new to LinkedIn audio, so we'll allow them to have that time for the learning curve. And this is something that we expected to happen as we're making this transition, so no problem. Why don't we go back and address those 3 pain points, right? Regulatory oversight, patient education, and patient agency. I see Michael has unmiked, so let's start with Michael.
So Sophie, I really unmiked here just to make sure that we can. There's Dr. Khan, where I was trying to get him on. Dr. Khan, can you hear us? I know you're in a fairly loud area, but please, your comments would be helpful. Nope, we've lost him again.
Where is he at, Michael?
I think he's standing in the clinic. I don't know where he is at this point.
Well, Dr. Khan, if you can unmute, and, when it's a little quieter, please do. But, this is Jennifer.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add, and I'm not entirely sure what we're thinking about in terms of regulatory, but what I would say is when we think about opening new centers, I started a consulting company several years ago with the primary goal of getting community centers more involved in clinical research. And I, found myself, like we all know, there's a real hesitation from a lot of sponsors to open up these smaller community centers. And I think part of the reason is because everyone is so fearful of the learning curve. And they're so fearful of fraud. Exactly that. They don't want a center that's not well known, that's not very experienced in research. I'm certainly not implying that would happen. But I think very often that sponsors tend to go back to the ones they know, the MD Andersons, the NYU, the Mount Sinai, because they know, they've been audited and they have the track record. So I think it's an interesting point that maybe people are so fearful of, of fraud, of getting in trouble, of opening a site that might not be, doing everything on the up and up. So I don't know that if it's a regulatory that's the roadblock for that, but I do feel like this is an area that we can all learn from, and really understanding what is fraud, where is this third rail of where we cannot get near. And I think some really great discussions have been brought up. Michael brought up the fact that we're doing so much to try to improve recruitment, and you see stuff all over social media, and you see this push to find patients that people are trying very many innovative things. But it's getting a little bit more gray, and I think we all could use some more clarity.
Those are great points, Jen, and I would agree with you. I think this is a very, very complex question, and we didn't want to burden the discussion today with literally. We've come up with about 20 or 30 recent examples of various versions of fraud in clinical trial conduct, and this it might be worth adding, Sophie, an additional topic here around. How do we self-police this? How is this, and who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in this? Certainly, you have the industry, the sponsors, and the sites, but are there other stakeholders who need to be brought into this? And as Sandra brought up earlier, to what degree is the education necessary to have proper conduct a part of this? The clinical trial environment is already burdened with innumerable endpoints that need to be collected, but maybe one of them has to do around compliance. I just throw that out to the group here. This is Michael.
Michael, can I comment really quick? I'd also like to kind of bring up the fact, like consent, right? That if my data is being misused, and if I'm a patient that has some kind of agency over it, I should be able to pull back my data from people who are misusing it. And I think that if there's a way, looking at things like blockchain or somewhere down the line, some future technology that may come in and give that kind of ability to a patient to be able to pull back data, I think that then there's a little more accountability if people know there's a real person that's watching those things. And so I think in all of these talks around the fraud, we also, in that education aspect, have to go back to that consent and really work on more of a like an e-consent kind of thing.
No, Christine, it's Michael, and I agree with you. I think that where we are in taking some steps towards the prevention of fraud can't all be focused on, what are the things that actually stop it from happening. The reality is that it will continue to happen. But if you feel as an enrolled patient that you don't want your data engaged and you don't have an agent who can help you do that, then what are the, today it's kind of like getting your bags off of an aircraft, off of an airplane once it's already in flight. If you don't want to be on that flight, how are you going to do that? And that's the situation in getting people to stay enrolled is the goal, and everything is driven around that. It's not driven around the fact that if that individual patient wants to unenroll, what then happens to their data. So I agree with you.
I would also say we need to start empowering our FDA. I think, the FDA has guidance, and they can send out warning letters. They have that kind of power, but it's really not working. And I think we need to look at how we can really put the efforts into creating the FDA that we want to see, an FDA that actually can move the industry in a positive direction and actually have insights based on all of the research that they have coming into them. I mean, imagine all this data and how useful it could be for all of us if we were able to kind of harness that and learn from it and create not just the clinicaltrial.gov platform to create it as a user-friendly platform, which it's currently not, but just sharing that information among the various industry leaders, because it's not just about making money, right? This is about patients, and we need to start looking at innovation in a way that helps and guides patients and not just the dollar amounts attached to it. But that's my...
Absolutely. I think that starts to answer some of Scott's questions about how do we engage regulatory, and FDA is definitely the greatest first place to start. How do we have a more engaged, involved FDA? So with that, I'll turn it to Scott. I know you have pearls here.
Yeah, well, no, I wanted to jump back. I mean, this is a really big topic, and we're touching on, there's a patient data thread here. There's a lot around patient, as Sandra brought up, patient education, patient trust. And again, if there's just a bad actor or two, and I just use that term again, I just feel like we have so much work to do to build patient trust and education around what is a clinical trial, why is your involvement important. Your patient involvement is, drug development does not happen. We don't have new therapies if patients do not enroll in studies. And when we have some fraud, some fabrication, some falsification, some plagiarism, what have you, it takes a very big step back for our industry in terms of building that trust, in terms of building that awareness. And so I think anyone in the industry needs to be sort of pitching in together to make sure that if we see any signs of fraud, that we realize it's hurting all of us here. It's hurting everybody who's called into this discussion today, who's actually involved, who cares about patients, who wants to help move new therapies forward. Fraud sets us all back quite a bit. So what can we do about that? I think there was a notice out earlier this week around how shorthanded the FDA is. I want to bring up another point in terms of sort of it takes a village. Can we all look out for fraud? Going back a little bit to the case that some of you have seen in the news recently around Pfizer and their Lyme disease treatment, the Valneva's phase 3 Lyme disease vaccine trial, and using sort of a little bit maybe of a new, I talked about decentralized clinical trials, using sort of a provider to help with a lot of those sites and enrolling patients. And, details are still slowly coming out around this. It doesn't sound like there was outright fabrication or fraud, but there definitely was at least GCP violations, right? That the sponsor, in this case Pfizer, saw and said, hold on, this puts everything at risk here if this isn't really done to the right standards. So we're going to actually close these, 79 sites and remove, several hundred patients from the trial. In that case, not that I want to be up here on a soapbox applauding Pfizer necessarily, but this is an example of a sponsor seeing something that they saw some major red flags, and I feel like they did what appears like the right thing, I think, in terms of like stopping. It cost them millions of dollars and many, many months in their development. And I think it's an example of at least a sponsor stepping in where maybe a regulatory agency didn't have the insight or the manpower or the awareness. And I just think it's an interesting example of a sponsor saying, hold on, we don't like what's going on over here, and trying to do the right thing.
I agree, Scott. What a great example. And I had a couple of other examples that we talked about last time. There were two major incidents of fraud last year, published, one in July and one in October. For some reason, they were both in Florida, with clinical research centers actually enrolling patients who were not eligible by falsifying their medical records, falsifying their data, using the wrong person's specimen, actually swapping specimens so that they could get a certain result that was, included in the inclusion-exclusion criteria, as well as entry data. So those are the kinds of serious fraud that we're talking about. As Scott said, I don't know that Pfizer's trial got to that level, but we want to stop it before it gets there, right? So I agree. I do applaud Pfizer for halting the trial and for throwing out that data that was not GCP compliant before maybe it got to the point of fraud. With that, I wanted to bring up another point, which is using the data, using statistics to preempt fraud or misconduct. How do we know, how do we predict when there might be a risk for fraud, or there might be a risk for misconduct or inappropriate data collection or analysis or reporting? And with that, I want to introduce Sabine, who is a statistician and may have some insight to this. So Sabine, please briefly introduce yourself and let us know what you wanted to add.
Hi, it's nice to join again because I used to join on Clubhouse, but then I've just been busy with work, so I'm happy to see you doing this on LinkedIn. I work in UK in oncology, NHS Clinical Trial Unit as a statistician, and it's been really interesting, and I've just been listening and kind of thought I would share my observations from my experiences working on clinical trials and kind of also from a statistician's point of view, that I've actually observed that mainly these issues and these fraud situations happen when trials go multi-center and international, because it's obviously much harder to monitor things that are happening in another country, because there's never enough money to fly and check every data entry. And then another point I wanted to raise, at least I know that's what is available for us, that was mentioned before, I think by Michael, about patient consent and their data, that I know that in our trust, patients can fill a specific form where they can request and see what data are held in a database. And every visit they have, there are re-consent forms that a nurse is discussing or a clinician with a patient. So at any point, they can just pull out, or they can find out what data is being held, which I think also helps these situations. Another thing that was mentioned, I think, at the beginning was about the recruitment, which also causes a lot of these situations. I think one solution where many hospitals and I believe trial units are going towards is having electronic patient record systems, which automatically can screen for the available trials and see if the patient is eligible with the data that is already held at the hospital, which I think is amazing. And then from monitoring these data, as so we asked what we are doing. We have an independent data monitoring committees that meet at, sometimes it's quarterly, sometimes it's every 6 months. So me as a statistician, I would request a data extract from a programmer that's assigned to specific trial, but me as a statistician or the trial manager, we don't have access or power to edit the data. Only a database programmer can do that. And these sessions for these committee meetings, I would prepare an open report, which would be shown to the trial manager, the chief investigator, and then there would be closed sessions held where only the independent data monitoring committee members would be able to attend, and I would then show them a different report with all the kind of primary endpoints for the clinical trial, and they then would decide if this data looks okay, or if there's something that they think is suspicious, or if it goes wrong, or if the intervention tested looks like it might be harmful to the patients, and they can pull like a stop plug on the trial and say this is not safe, we need to stop it. And in addition, we do also central statistical monitoring, where I can request data, kind of normally it's done I think quarterly, and then I just run a quick analysis to see what data is missing, is there any outliers, and then that gets flagged to the trial team. But yeah, there's a lot of issues, but I think for at least UK we are going the right direction and trying to do all the monitoring that is possible to just make it safe for the patients and also get accurate results.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's exactly what I was hoping you would share.
Sophie.
Sophie. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Is that Michael?
Matt. I apologize. Just wanted to make 2 points there. Sabine, thank you for sharing the analyses that are available. I think as we think about the fraud and where it seems to stem from, it's coming obviously out of greed, right? A lot of these trials and where this leads to is looking for cash. A lot of our health systems and hospitals, though in the States, they take up about 42% of the healthcare dollar spend, they're still looking for opportunities for cash. I guess the question I throw out there hypothetically is there an opportunity, legally and compliantly, to provide a bonus, so to speak, for compliance in that trial when all the data is said and done and completed and evaluated, to ensure that they remain in compliance but don't get outside of those zones just to harvest more patients. And then I would say secondarily, I think a lot of what we hear in the patient community is the strictness of the recruiting criteria and how much, because most of the time we don't engage with patients ahead of the trial, how many patients do not meet criteria yet are great candidates for said potential drug candidate. So those two elements, I think, reduce the available patient load and at the same time lead our sites looking for patients and lead them to potentially committing fraud as a way to come up to the numbers that they were expecting to hit by the coordinator.
Excellent points, Matt. I agree with you. Instead of rewarding only enrollment numbers, why can't we reward compliance as well? Or maybe reward compliance more, so that we have more of an incentive to stick to the protocol and to the regulations and guidelines and patient safety. The ethical standards that we stick to are there for a reason, and were historically proven. So that's really important. And I think you brought up some really great points. One example I wanted to give, following what Sabine said, was, we do, where I work, we do have a DSMB, and I do present the data to them on a quarterly basis. One time, one of the DSMB members, after I presented the data, just paused for a second, looked at our demographics, and looked at our overall data. We have over 200 patients enrolled in a particular study, and asked, Sophie, how come there are no Latinx patients in this study? And that was a relevant question, because the indication, the condition that we were studying, was prevalent in Latinx patients. So that's just an example of something that can be picked out by someone who is unbiased, looking in from the outside. And there are many more points that can be picked up by someone who is unbiased, who's not on the inside designing the trial. The other thing we started to do is bring patient focus groups at the design phase. So we have patient representatives who give us feedback on how the study is being designed, the follow-up procedures, follow-up visits, the frequency of those visits, and what's being done at those visits, how feasible that is. I think that's really important, to bring patients in right from the beginning, not after enrollment has begun. So thank you, Matt. With that, I think we have to wrap
Sophie,
up. We're
I just couldn't agree more. I know, and I know Sandra would kill me if I didn't say this, and I think this also speaks to Scott when he was talking about it takes a village. When are we going to create that training that trains all patients on what clinical trials are, to erase the stigma and ensure that we do so in a way that breaks down walls in different cultures that view the stigma of a clinical trial or disease as well?
Absolutely. And the mistrust that goes along with that, which is also culturally connected, right? I think that's really very important. But we are at the top of the hour, and it is time to wrap up and get to a closing of our topic here. So I am going to pass the mic to Michael to start us off, and we will hear closing comments from each of our panel members, and then we will hear about the next topic coming on April 21st. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Sophie. First of all, thanks to my co-moderators here for helping construct, design, implement, and deliver. We weren't perfect today, but we really appreciated all that. My LinkedIn messaging has just been flooded. I think we've got a topic that obviously needs more exploration. We can't do everything in 1 hour's time, but thank you so much on behalf of our sponsor, Consuli, as well as certainly the team that's been assembled here. This has been great. I encourage all of you to come back next month. We'll all have over time the chance to chime in. And again, Sophie, outstanding job in moderating today. So I know a couple of our co-mods may have had to jump off here, but please, Scott, can I ask you, if you're still on, can you please do some closing comments?
You bet, Michael. Thanks. Thanks again to our great moderators and Sophie for moderating and kind of keeping us going here today with this new format. For those of you still with us, thanks for your patience with us as we kick off kind of this monthly series. I think you'll see the topics and the format get structured a little bit more. But the goal, of course, is to focus on one burning question that will move from month to month, and to also make sure we get you as participants involved. So thanks for listening, and don't be shy about raising your hands and bringing up some comments. I think we'll also try to encourage a little bit discussion going forward. But of course, at the end of the day, we want to take some action as well. So we'll be focused on some solutions and some thoughts and some ideas around how to kind of take the conversation into an actionable way. So really, really looking forward to the next month and for each of those months that follows. So thank you. And then are there any final things we need to say to our?
Yeah, Christine needs to jump in here because, like all great patient advocates, she needs to be in 5 places at one time. So go, Christine.
I'm logged on to another meeting, so if anyone wants to watch the researchers convention, that's going on next. But I wanted to say, I think one of the things that I'd like to ask our audience and the people that are left here listening is, we're having a lot of conversations that involve multiple stakeholders, and we don't always have them in the same place. I know that we go to a lot of conferences and we're missing the key essential people when we're making decisions. And so I'd like to invite all of you as we move forward to invite people from different silos of healthcare who can really help us look at these issues from a different perspective and really include everybody in there. And I'll leave it at that. But thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Christine. Jennifer or Sophie, Jen, I know you want to tee up a little bit about next month.
Yeah, unless anyone has any last closing comments they'd like to make.
I think the only thing I want to add before you talk about the next month's topic is that we will have a follow-up post, a summary of this discussion, as well as Taya's archiving. So in there, I will post links to the articles that we referenced today. So you can read up on those articles and come back next month armed and to join us. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you, Jennifer.
So, Sophie, since you brought that up, I just wanted to make sure that those who are listening know there is a LinkedIn group that is called Clinical Trials, One Burning Question. You can go there and we will be archiving all of the resources, case studies, etc. So you'll be able to get that, but you'll just need to pop onto LinkedIn and go to LinkedIn groups and look for that group.
Excellent. On to Jennifer.
Okay. So thank you guys for great conversation. I think I made some notes. One of the things that jumped out at me is the self-policing so much, because I do feel like in our world of ClinOps, we are always self-policing. So I'm glad that Scott brought that up. And I'm proud too. Pfizer does the right thing, right? I mean, that's what we have to do. So thank you again for a great talk. What we'd like to talk about next month is something that's near and dear to my heart. It's near and dear to most people's heart. It's about the common topic of diversity. And, for the first time in our lifetime, we're seeing giant diversity committees. People have full conferences about it now. So it's made a lot of us think. And what I've been thinking about is what we're titling this is sometimes we're forgetting about the large D in diversity. And that D is disabled. And so we would like to talk about different people besides racial, just differences in diversity. We're thinking about visually impaired, hearing impaired, mobility impaired. It's an area that is sometimes overlooked and very, very important. And what we're going to do next month is we're bringing a guest speaker up. It's a very, very good friend of mine. Her name is Kristen Smedley. Kristen has just made a documentary in partnership with Salesforce. And the point of her documentary is about removing barriers for disabled within the workforce. So we're not going to focus on that. We're going to think about it in terms of clinical trials. But we wanted to talk about, again, disabled, general disabilities in terms of trials. We will touch upon, visually impaired, hearing impaired, mobility impaired, and anything in between. So that's the plan for next month. And we will send out some information soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Really looking forward to that. So just before we close, any last comments from Taya and then Sandra? And then we'll close.
Thank you, Sophie. I think we had a really great discussion, just barely picking really at the top layer of all the frauds and disruptions we see in this area. So hopefully it gave people at least a starting point to do some research on and really think about how our individual piece adds to this puzzle of oversight. So thank you, and I'll pass it to Sandra.
Thank you so much. And I don't have anything else to add in reference to today's comments, but what I would encourage Consuli and what I would encourage this group to do is to take a look at the social determinants of health and how each of those determinants tie into clinical trials so that in future meetings perhaps that's something that can be addressed, because perhaps in looking at each individual silo, we can then come up with some sustainable solutions, including patients.
Sandra, it's Michael, and I'm just going to interject here, Sophie. I really appreciate the direction from which you're coming. Ultimately, when we talk about fraud, we talk about all of these social determinants. The reality is they dramatically impact the level of trust that patients or potential patients, enrollees have for clinical trial development. And clinical trials are the avenue for these new therapies to come forward. And without this element of trust and understanding and education, as you brought up, Sandra, this isn't going to get any better. So this is one of the reasons why the Clinical Trials OBQ wants to address this burning question. And you can look for us each month to try and tackle something, even in a small way, because I agree, we only scraped the top of what we wanted to talk about today. But thank you so much, all of you, for joining and at least lifting one of the veils here around fraud. Sophie?
Thank you, Michael. I couldn't agree more, and thank you so much, Sandra and Taya, for just being honest. We did just scratch the surface. There's so much more to talk about. And with that being said, if any of you have any suggestions for future topics for the OBQ beyond April, I encourage you to look for our summary post and comment. Give us an idea in the comments about what you would like to hear us talking about, what topic you would like us to broach next. So if you missed any of the conversation in the beginning, or you have to go now and you want to hear it back, just look for the link in the summary post, and you'll get access to Taya's archive, and you'll be able to hear back this conversation. So in closing, again, I'm Sophie Yohannan, and the host for this OBQ. We will have a different host for each month, and we're really excited to have you here at this new platform, LinkedIn Audio, and hope you'll join us again. So with that, I will wrap up, and we will close this room in 5. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you again.
3, 2, 1.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Good job. We'll see you all soon. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.